Okay, everyone, it's 7 on the dot, and I know some of you are pausing dinner to come and see this, so I'll try and get you to your belated dinners as quickly as possible. So this is a 3-hour journey, condensed into 45 minutes on some of the I should just call this cool space stuff. So maybe I mentioned a little earlier in the week that I always had this dream of being an astronaut and wanting to go to space, and then had to come up with a plan B. This is a little bit of the story of some of the stuff I did on plan B and how it all worked out in the end. So this was sort of my vision as a kid growing up, what space was like. You became a NASA test pilot and you flew stuff. There's a whole bunch of NASA astronauts with one of the training aircraft. This is what I imagined, this sort of stoic, heroic figure. You train for 10 years, you fly the space shuttle, and you help empty the trash on the space station. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to do. When I was 17, I applied to the Australian Air Force, and then I have a little test for all of the males in the room. Who's seen this before? One very strong hand there. I failed. I was 17. I didn't, in retrospect, knew, but at the time didn't really consciously know that I was colorblind a little bit. So blues and purples in particular. That is very hard. So anyway, they yanked me out of the line unceremoniously and sent me home with my duffel bag, and there was actually they stamped my medical record permanently medically unfit for duty. So I could not serve in the Australian Air Force. My dreams of getting transferred to the US Air Force, to go to NASA, all of that was dashed. So I'd resolved that day that I would get my ass to space one way or the other, and spent a long time trying to figure that out. So Australia at the time did not have a space industry, so I went off and did the next best thing I could think of, which was study science. And I did my undergraduate degree on archival data from the Voyager spacecraft, trying to pull new science out of this 30-year-old data that we had of this magnificent spacecraft that's still operating today. I think it's the furthest thing from planet Earth that we put into space, like 45 billion miles. Kilometers, sorry. So I got this data and was working on it, trying to find new science and understanding about some of the planets like Neptune and Saturn and so on that the spacecraft visited. And then just by chance, and I think a lot of what I've achieved in life was just down to pure dumb luck, I was walking through the hallway and one of the professors said, "We just landed a contract to build a spacecraft in collaboration with the government of Denmark to study stars. Would you like to work on that for your PhD?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so in a country with no space program, just as I was about to graduate from my undergraduate degree and have no idea what I was going to do next, a space program landed in my lap. So I spent 4.5 years mindlessly working on optical design for this telescope. Vowed never, ever to work in space optics again, as I think most people feel after they finish their PhD. They're like, I never want to do that again. We got all the way to starting to manufacture test components for this satellite, and then the Danish government changed to a conservative government. They canceled the entire program. And so I changed my PhD from a space telescope to a proposed space telescope. And that is where I learned my my second lesson in the space industry, which is programs all the way from, a full life cycle of a space program from conception through to cancellation. So when I graduated again, I'd been traveling to these international conferences trying to meet the international space community outside Australia, and I got an invitation to go and work at NASA Ames Research Center, which if anyone's been to the Bay Area, just south of San Francisco, there's a NASA Research Center right next to Google, key plot point. So this is, I think there's about 10 NASA centers in the entire United States. Some of them, famous ones, Houston, JPL in Pasadena, Kennedy Space Center in Florida. There's this small, barely known one parked right next to Google that does a bunch of kind of new but small niche stuff, and not a lot of it is mainstream spaceflight. They just build interesting experiments and tests and work on new concepts, but it's like a little bit out of the way and a little bit unknown. But because it was in Silicon Valley, we got to do some really cool stuff. So this was a concept for building a lunar lander that would be, I think we're trying to aim to make it about 1,000 times cheaper than anything else that had been built before. So if you think about, the robotic landers that land on the moon today, the government ones, most of those cost somewhere between 400 million and about 2 billion. The Mars rover, the rovers that go to Mars and land, those are about $2 to $4 billion programs. So we were trying to land something on the moon for $80 million, which which is relatively cheap. So we started using new technologies for NASA at the time, which is like carbon fiber composites for structures, using off-the-shelf components for computers and so on. So this was an idea. So then we ran into this other little problem that our spacecraft was, we were building this in California. Historically, lunar landers are built in one of the other NASA centers, Alabama. So we had 2 senators from Alabama lobby Congress to have our program canceled. So in the end, in a clever little sleight of hand, we took the legs off, so it was no longer a lander, and built an orbiting spacecraft called Laddie, which we ultimately launched. They went and orbited the moon, did a bunch of really interesting science on dust that arises from the lunar surface. As the sunlight goes around the moon and we go wax and wane from full moon to new moon and so on, as that edge of the shadow goes around the moon, dust gets thrown up into space electrostatically. And for future human habitation on the moon, that might be a problem with this spiky, it's actually because of the radiation from space, the dust on the moon is very sharp, aka cancerous. And so if you ingest these fibers, much like asbestos and other things, they could potentially cause respiration issues. So we wanted to understand, what does it look like when this dust gets tossed up into space? So we flew this mission and then we landed it at 2 kilometers a second. And Bill, I think your dinner invitation is up, so you've been summoned. Well, you'll have to find out. Yeah. Anyway, the punchline, Bill, was we crashed this into the moon and did a soft landing at 2 kilometers a second. Oh, by the way, back. One of the things about this program is we wanted to do this for about $80 million. After taking off the legs and not landing on the moon and finally launching the spacecraft, this thing cost $320 million. And actually, even though the program itself, the science was a success, I felt like the objective of developing a low-cost spacecraft, we kind of failed. Maybe it was lower cost, but it really wasn't low. And with this idea of, us, part of this in this talk, I'm hoping is a bit of a rebuttal to some of the things Neil said earlier. We can't really get to space if things just continue to cost so much. And so we were really disappointed that this thing cost $320 million and didn't even land. So we were right next to Google. And this is around the time, 2008, 2009, 2010, when the iPhone and the Google Nexus phones were coming out, the Google Android phones, the droids, Motorola Droid, who remembers the droid? Yeah, so we ran into some Google people and we're like, why don't we just put a phone in space? That's everything. It's got everything that's in a satellite. If you think about it, you've got camera, you've got a computer, you've got navigation, you've got sensors that tell you orientation, you've got a built-in battery. It really is a satellite just without little rocket engines, right? It's only missing the propulsion system. So that's a really crazy idea. So that big button, we got a phone, and I've cropped this photo off, but actually on the full one it says proprietary Motorola Incorporated, not for distribution. Engraved with a laser engraver on the front of the phone. This is an early development prototype of the Motorola Droid, and here we have it in a vacuum chamber, pumped down to the ambient pressure of space. About, for those, I forget what it is in PSI, but in evil units, it's 10 to the minus 14 torr. So very few particles of air left. And to our great surprise, this thing worked. It's running in vacuum. At the time, we're like, well, why would that be the case? Maybe it'll overheat, maybe it'll explode, maybe there's capacitors and things, batteries, it'll just... But nope, it just worked and I was quite happy. That was test number 1. Number 2 was like, well, can we launch this thing? So we went out into the Black Rock Desert where Burning Man is held in the off-season, and we launched a bunch of sounding rockets. In one of them, we drilled a hole through the rocket, glued the phone on the inside, wrote a little app to record some data, and launched it. So this is Rocket Cam.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Push the button.
Uh-oh, there goes.
That's some real real shit right there. Arcing. Arcing.
Or is it still going?
It's still going.
Still going.
Now we're arcing.
Check your smoke just so you can see it dry.
Jesus Christ, that went up high.
Yeah, it was just a push rocket. Wait a minute, is it okay? I don't care, I got GPS.
I can't see it.
A little summary of this graph at the bottom. This is the accelerometer in the phone showing the different events that the rocket went through. And this was all measured with the actual phone itself. So you can see, I'm colorblind, I guess the top line's green, is it? So it's sitting at 10, which is in the units of the phone, it's meters per second squared. That's the acceleration, that's Earth. It's about 9.8. It's reading 10 because it's a little uncalibrated, but that's just sitting on the ground. That's the gravitational pull of Earth when the rocket is stationary. At launch, it jumps up and hits 20, doesn't go past 20 because nobody at Google thought that anyone would ever put their phone above 2G. So we get to 2G, or 20 meters per second squared, and it's under propulsion. And then you can see when the engine turns off, it drops to 0. So we're in free fall. So we fly through free fall, and then suddenly we start to hit a bit of air resistance. We start to slow down again. So there's no forces on the rocket. And then the parachute pops out, and then it gets turbulent where the parachute is bobbing the thing. So this was really, really cheap. Like, yeah. No, I mean, it's plus minus 20 because it's, you know, whether your phone's up or down, it doesn't really matter. No, they did not. Yeah, so actually, I think I misspoke. So the negative one is probably where the rocket separated and there was a shock when the top came off, and then we hit to free fall in the middle there. So that was cool. We also wanted to do some other tests. We had 3 tests in mind. Does it work in space? Can it really survive a launch? And the other question was, does it do anything useful? And so we also then did a bunch of balloon tests where we built this little CubeSat. Who knows what a CubeSat is? A couple of people. So a CubeSat is a standard size for a kind of like student or developmental CubeSat that's about 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. And we just jam the phone in the box. So I don't know if you can see here, that's the USB power plug for the phone, and that is the phone wedged in this box with some extra batteries. So we basically just put the phone in a little metal box, tied it to a weather balloon, and launched it into the atmosphere. Oh, so that is an antenna. That's a UHF antenna made out of, who knows what that yellow thing is? Yeah, I heard it, tape measure. So we just got a piece of tape measure because it folds over, and when you let it go straight again. So that's some amazing space tech. So we built this thing, we called it PhoneSat, and here we are launching it on a weather balloon. We launched this up to about 30 kilometers altitude, and we made an app to record the images off the camera, pick the best one, and send it down over the radio, that little yellow antenna, send it down to us on the ground. And we ran our entire mission off this balloon for about 2 hours, and it worked. So with those 3 pieces of evidence, it works in space, it does something useful, and it can survive a rocket, we convinced NASA to let us launch some, which they did. So on the maiden flight of the Antares rocket, this was a new rocket. Nobody really wanted to be on it because if it blew up, like everything was going to get lost. So we kind of got a discount to launch our discounted satellite. And send it into space. So this is, we put 3 phones, actually, because they were so cheap, we launched 3 of them. So we put 3 of those cubes into orbit. And this is from about 275 kilometers above the Earth. This is an 8 megapixel phone camera image, chopped into little chunks and sent down over that tiny little tape measure antenna. And this program was so deprived of funds, we didn't even have a ground station. So we asked ham radio operators all around the world to pick up our packets. And so every little square here was received by a ham radio operator and then emailed to us. And we assembled it. And so there's missing pieces because we didn't get everything. But Also, the app that we wrote on the phone was kind of terrible because I don't know why it thought this was the best photo, but this was pre-AI, and our AI sucked. But this was a cell phone photo from space out of a satellite, including the box and the launch that cost about $75,000 to build. So for anyone here who wants to replicate this for the price of basically a second mortgage on your home, you could have your own space program. That's really my key message today. Space has suddenly become accessible. I think it'll continue to get cheaper, but if at least just one of you goes home and builds one of these things, I'll be very, very happy. So anyway, the camera wasn't very good. So we're like, we need a better camera. So that we found these bird watching telescopes. These are 1.4 meter focal length telescopes. They're about 10 centimeters or 4 inches in diameter, about the size of a wine bottle. And we thought if we could jam that wine bottle inside 3 of those cubes, which is about the size of a loaf of bread. So if you want the really gory image of a wine bottle shoved inside a loaf of bread, that's what you're looking at here. It's a very large telescope jammed in a box. And then with the miniaturization available to us through the small components in phones and laptops and so on, we're able to pack all the satellite-y bits around the stem of the wine bottle in the empty space. So it wasn't just a big box full of boxes like most satellites. This was a very small box with a very large telescope inside and the rest of the satellite in the nooks and crannies. And this we called Doves because we wanted to launch a fleet of Doves to image the whole world every day. It's sort of our goal. If the satellites were this cheap, why not launch hundreds of them? This is one of my friends and engineer, Ben Howard, who did a lot of the design, and you can see for scale, there's our little loaf of bread, or the size of a small house cat. And you can see here we've added some extra antennas and so on that thing, and some solar panels, which the original one lacked, and some more launches. So here we are doing some test launches off the International Space Station. This time they let us, for this case, we actually carried these into the space station, and astronauts launched them out of this sort of device down here, this box here. And it's a cool, that's the same photo. By the way, photo credit, Scott Kelly. This is a photo he took out of the window of the International Space Station of our satellites getting pushed out. And I really like this one. So this is from about 400 kilometers, 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, straight down, and you can see fields and farms and our satellites. Yep. Yes. Oh, yes. We added that. So these satellites have reaction wheels and magnetorquers to use the magnetic field of the Earth to slow us down. And yes, we had to kind of build them ourselves, but they, when we tried to buy them, people wanted to charge us like $300,000 each for them, which was more than the cost of the satellite. So okay, so what's the best way to describe this? If you're spinning, it's like a ballerina, right? If you want to, if you pull your arms in, you spin faster. If you put them out, you can. In space, there's nothing to grab hold of. So if you want to point a certain way, you can kind of spin something the other way. And so the satellite will slew to the right if you spin a wheel to the left. You then have a problem, though, is that wheel is still spinning. So by definition, the satellite is still spinning. So you need to do something to dump that energy as well. So we have some magnetic coils that use the Earth like handlebars. Actually, that magnetic field interacts with the Earth's magnetic field and slows us down. So we use the magnetic field to stop the turn and some wheels to spin it up. That's sort of like the simplified version. And that way we can take images where we want to. Without it, the satellite just kind of spins around and you get random nonsense for photos. So that's a great question. So we launched a whole bunch of these from the space station, and this was the first photo we got back from those. So you can kind of see the difference with the slightly larger telescope. So this is a pine forest in northwest Washington State, just outside, I think, Seattle area. And it's cool because you can see trees, you can see roads, you can see power lines, you can see divisions between areas, there's rivers and gullies. And one of our goals was, in terms of like monitoring the whole world every day, was being able to see what happens on our planet and understand change. And so here we could actually see trees. If we came back a week later and one of the trees was gone, we'd see it. And that's kind of amazing. We then built another satellite. I wanted to show this photo. Go ahead. Yes. So this one, because we were kind of low to the ground, this is about 2 meters per pixel. Most of the satellites were then, when you're in low Earth orbit, it's a trade-off between lifetime, because the atmosphere slows you down, higher resolution if you're lower, longer lifetime if you're higher. We ended up at about 3 meters a pixel once we picked the right altitude to launch these into. So each pixel is about 3 meters, or a car would be about 2 pixels in this kind of photo. This was from our second satellite. This was also the first image of that, and this was a part of the frozen Baltic Sea, just as I think it was going into the northern winter. And just because we're in the ice, this was probably the most printed photo at that time in our company, because it was just beautiful. Yeah, you can see this is something that doesn't exist anymore because it was a transient phenomenon that melted in the summer. But it was, just a really beautiful photo. So, we started a company to do this. Well, actually, the little joke before that was we went to NASA headquarters saying, hey, we can build all of your space missions for 100 for the cost. And they're like, that's not credible. And they laughed us out of the room. So we went and started a company, raised some VC money, and built lots of these things. And this is one of our other engineers, Matt Lagon, doing the assembly. We built a little factory. We actually had the former mayor of San Francisco, Ed Lee, come in and visit the San Francisco space program. He really loved it. And just some more cool photos. This is Lake Terborg. I don't know if you know that, Derek, somewhere in Canada. But it's a glacier flowing out into a lake. I tried to pick some ice photos for our week. This is another one. This is the Patagonian Andes in autumn or fall. So what's cool about it is there is north and south facing aspects to these hills. And the southern facing parts of the hills have already gone into autumn, and the northern facing ones are still green because it just hasn't gotten dark enough for the trees to switch yet. So you have fall on one side and summer on the other. It's kind of cool. And then this is in Peru. This is one of the cool things about mapping the whole world every day is you see all kinds of things that humans are doing. And one of them all along the coast of Chile and Peru and a lot of other sort of arid regions is desalination plants that are being built to put in place agriculture in areas that were previously deserts. You see a lot of this in the middle of China as well, where to feed humans, we are putting agriculture all over the planet. And you see a lot of this when you look at data. So meanwhile, that's the end of the Planet Lab story. With a little coda at the end. Other people, some of them over here in the room, Michael and Audrey, have been working on the aspects of human spaceflight, employing a lot of the concepts that I talked about with the addition of tremendous needs for safety to fly humans, not something that we were worried about at Planet. But also, and similarly, there's Virgin Galactic, another company. This individual, Sarisha, is on the ship as well. So if you run into Sarisha, you can ask her about her experience flying on Virgin Galactic. So during COVID, I was sitting on a beach in Hawaii, twiddling my thumbs with Vanessa, nothing really to do. And then I got a call from a friend who said, oh, there's a photo of Sarisha, by the way. Would you like to go to space? And then I met these wonderful people, Audrey Powers over here, who I flew with, Mr. Shatner, who we've all met now, and then Glenn DeVries, who sadly passed away about a month after our flight. But we did get to share this wonderful experience with Glenn, and he was a really awesome guy. So it was kind of really great crew for us to fly to space with. So this is the launch site 1 in Van Horn, Texas for Blue Origin. We went out and did some training. There's Bill looking very happy. Spacesuit fitting, training. Training's relatively short because on a suborbital flight, you're not in space long enough to get appendicitis, and if you do, you can just come back and go to the hospital. So we mostly were concerned about how to have a good time, how to be very safe on the vehicle, and deal with any situations like the landing and how to get in and out of the door, how to get in and out of our seats, and not hurt ourselves on the way down, and so on. So training was a lot of fun. Just for anyone who's familiar with how the Blue Origin New Shepard vehicle works, I can just give you a quick run through. Apologize if I get anything wrong here. But it's a one-stage rocket made of 2 parts. There's the capsule and the booster. The booster takes off, and then when they turn the engine off, which happens about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes into the flight, the capsule separates and has enough momentum to go above the Kármán line. The booster then returns, lands by itself, and so it's completely reusable. And then we have a great time up in space. We float down, parachutes, and then we land. And I'll recap that with some cool little videos here. This is Glenn saying thank you to our lovely, sorry, there's a question there? Okay, I'll get to that. Yeah. There's one of the safety mechanisms which we didn't get to use was this solid rocket motor that if something goes wrong, it would separate the capsule quite violently from the rest of the rocket and get us away. And so here's Glenn saying thank you to the, to the beloved solid rocket motor that would keep us safe. And the design is very cool because it just kind of looks like a Star Trek part of the spaceship, but it's got a ton of a huge amount of explosive material inside there. And then, of course, you know, nerds will be nerds. And then we had to come up with a team name. One of the things during training was one of the hazards of spaceflight is getting bitten by a snake after you land. And you know, this is in the desert, right? There's javelinas, there's rattlesnakes, there's cactuses. I did actually have to go to the medical tent at one point because I got a huge bunch of cactus spines in the front of my leg. None of this was really spaceflight related, but we decided to call our team name the Snake Bites. And so here we are doing our little Snake Bites team sign. And then here's just, I have a couple of videos that kind of run you also through the spaceflight experience, in a similar order to what I described in that graphic. So this is us driving off. This is Blue Origin employee Jeff Bezos closing the door. So that's the first part of the takeoff.
Weightlessness. Oh, Jesus.
Kármán line.
No description can equal this. Weightlessness.
This is nuts!
Oh, my God.
This is
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm telling you.
Holy hell.
Oh, my goodness me. Oh, wow. I can't believe this.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I carried up this little Lego man as a tribute to our inner children, and you know, Lego was a really big part of my sort of growing up and inspiration, so I carried this little Lego guy into space. So, I don't know, maybe not, but yeah, they do take a lot of toys and gorilla suits, I hear, up to the space station, so they might have taken some Lego in the past, but it's about 4 minutes, yeah, and Glenn yelled out Kármán line in the middle. You heard Glenn saying that. Bill had this idea that we should get together and do a moment of solidarity. As a crew, we'd agreed mostly we were going to look out of the window. We weren't going to throw Skittles at each other and do too many acrobatics, but we were just going to look out of the window. But as we crossed the Kármán line and reached the apogee, the peak of our flight, we decided to, I'll come back to that one, get together and do a group photo in the middle. So we paused, came back, jumped in front of the camera, smiled, went back to our windows. But that's sort of like my favorite photo of our crew, just hanging out in space. Bill looks a bit surprised. And then this is, put these out of order, but this is my experience from my seat camera. One of the cool things was to get out of your seat in space is actually really easy. You just undo your seatbelt, and there's enough pressure in the foam in the seat to just push you out. And we promised we wouldn't do any acrobatics, but it was so intoxicating I did anyway. Oops, go back. Is that going to play? Yeah.
That's it.
all the things floating in the capsule were mine, by the way, because I was like, there was also a 3D printed model of our Dove spacecraft that was floating off on the right there. So then the booster returns to ground. And I think Glenn yelled out that he got to see that from his window. We could, because the capsule's rotating, we didn't all have the same view at the same time, but Glenn got to see that from his window, which was really cool. I think that's just epic. And then here's us. Go ahead. I don't think there's a parachute on the booster, right? No, it just turns on its own rocket again and fully decelerates, and then it has these big springy legs that take out a lot of the shock when it lands. And I'd also like to point out that Blue Origin has had a perfect track record of have landed every single one of those. And also we're the first to do a soft landing, I believe. Yes? Yeah. And then this is us. So here's how the landing part works for us. There are parachutes, which is great. And then we also have some air thrusters on the bottom of our capsule that kind of act like a cushion. At the last second, they blow out some air. So what you're going to see in the video looks like we hit the ground and made a massive crater, but it's not. It's actually the air jets blowing up the desert dust, so don't be fooled. But this is a very gentle experience.
And capsule touchdown. Welcome back, the newest astronauts.
There's that Jeff guy again. They make him work really hard. Oh, he really did. There's Vanessa and Audrey's sister with the hat. And just not all fun and games. I like to share this slide as well because this is Jeff and his partner Lauren, Vanessa, Glenn's partner Leah, and Audrey's sister Kathleen. They're having to put up with us going to space, and it's a very different experience. Jeff says that when he went, him and his brother were laughing and had a great time, and they came back and their entire family had been crying, and his nephew had passed out from shock. Definitely going to space can have a huge impact on those that you leave behind because it's a really scary thing. And just to wrap up here, put a bow on all of this story, this is a photograph taken by a satellite from my company Planet Labs of the launch site just after our launch. And so these little specks that's actually the capsule and the recovery vehicles. That's the landing pad for the booster, and a little zoom in there of the rocket and the cars, and where we had the big press conference of all the vehicles there. And so this is the same satellite that we're going to use later in the week to try and take that sort of family photo up on the deck. Daniel will announce when that'll happen exactly, but we're going to try go out, point one of these down south, take a photo, and wave at it. So just to give you an idea of how big it is, you probably won't be seen in it. You'll be like 1 pixel, but we'll see the ship. And yeah. And then just a huge thank you to the Blue Origin team for making all this happen and helping this little kid achieve his dream. So. Yeah, and I think we have scheduled about still 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone, yeah. So they don't all stay up forever. Atmospheric drag actually slows them down eventually and they fall down. The average lifetime is about 4.5 years. So we think we've launched nearly 700 and I think we have about 400 operational. So these, and I forgot to mention how this really works. The satellites are all in a ring around the Earth, and so as the Earth turns, we can actually kind of like a line scanner scan the whole world every day. So we have about 400 operational at the moment. Over there? I have no idea. Yeah, of course, yes. So some of them end up in Google Maps. A big usage is agriculture. So, and there's a secondary usage, which is hedge funds that want to look at like what's happening on the world. A huge number of our users are actually environmental and nonprofit groups that want to do things. Big program, we have a $40 million a year program with the Norwegian government to monitor forests all around the world and track deforestation, yeah. So there's, agriculture is really big, industry, maritime protection. We worked with the late Paul Allen's Allen Foundation to monitor every coral reef around the planet. So we instead of monitoring just the land area, there's 145 million square kilometers of land on the Earth. We increased that by 10% to be able to capture all of the coastal areas as well. So we now monitor daily every coral reef on the planet as well. So, yes. Yes. So we have a range now. We still fly those smaller ones, but the image quality's improved. We've increased the battery lifetime and the antenna speed. I think now we actually have really good internet on these things. We have 4 gigabit a second downlinks from that tiny satellite. So we increased the data rate, the size of the resolution of the images, the number of color bands that we look at. There's a NASA program called Landsat that develops it's like the gold standard of Earth monitoring. We match all of the color bands they use, so our data is backwards compatible with the NASA data as well. So that, we added more, not just red, green, blue, but I think now we have 7 bands. We also just launched a hyperspectral variant, which is 50 color bands as well. In hyperspectral, you can see more things. There's things that are invisible to the naked eye that you can see in other color bands. So yes, stuff like that, yeah. And over there? Yeah, so I had about 8 months notice that I was going to fly, and I was more terrified the whole time for those whole 8 months. Yeah, and so even the day of, I was very, very nervous. I remember doing like a little video diary that morning, and I actually still can't watch that because I was very, very anxious. But the second that Jeff closed the door on the capsule, I was kind of committed, and I remember just this calm came over me, and I just like, it's either going to work out or it isn't. So, in the back there, young gentleman. Absolutely, but I need to take this person with me next time. Michael. Yeah. For Planet or for? Oh, that was the NASA Ames lunar lander. Yeah. So we hit our cost targets. Yeah. So that was sort of our shtick. We were like relentless about fighting cost growth. And so one of the things about not flying humans and being your own customer is you can cut corners and there's no one to yell at you. And so we really just took tremendous risk with these satellites, and we're just lucky that it worked out. Oh yeah, even better, I think, yeah. So for comparison, I think the satellites we launched were about 10,000 times cheaper than the equivalent satellite you could buy from a satellite manufacturer at that point in time. So, yeah. So up here, yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So we want to build maps, basically. So we take images from each individual satellite, we pull them down to our own ground stations, and then in the cloud, we assemble it into different data products, a composite map of the whole world. We have a daily mosaic. We can do stacks, so we can do videos of every location, like yesterday, today, day before. And then we sell those products on to customers, so that most customers are buying map data or extracted data from the maps that we could glean what was happening on the surface. That's the products we sell. Yeah, so some customers want big, yeah. half and half. Some customers want maps, some customers just want answers. And so we work with each customer to sort of provide the right blend for them for their application. Some people have their own systems, like the US government. They have a lot of expertise in-house to process Earth imagery. And then if you're like a small shop that just wants to monitor your local environment, maybe you just really want the answer and you don't want to hire experts to do that for you. So we will work with them to figure out what they need. Up the back? Yes. Yeah, so Landsat is kind of like the flagship US government Earth imaging satellite. I'm not remembering the exact numbers now. I used to know this off by hand, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's very, very large, and it's sort of like the gold standard of Earth imaging. So it's a very carefully designed, carefully manufactured, carefully tested, aka expensive, expensive, expensive satellite. But it is the gold standard. And so we, to be able to work within the community for Earth imaging experts and provide data that they were familiar with, we had to really match what they were doing anyway. So our satellite is kind of like one Landsat satellite chopped up into 100 pieces. And then each one just does its own thing. And so Landsat, I think, maps the whole world once a month maybe, or once every 14 days. But we do it daily because we're able to launch so many more satellites for roughly the same price. So, yep, over there. I think we probably have 30 ground stations around the world now. Yeah, I had some pictures of them, but I forgot to include them. But we have one nearish here, like somewhere really south of New Zealand. We built one. So our satellites are in what's called a polar orbit, so they go over the poles. And that's nice because then as the Earth turns, you capture the whole area of the Earth every day. If you were in a different orbit, I think if you recall from one of Neil's or Scott's talks, they was talking about this 51-degree inclination, then you only get half the Earth. So ours are polar, so we see the whole Earth. And so we have a lot of ground stations in Norway, Greenland, Iceland, New Zealand, Australia, and then some in Germany and US as well. So, yeah. 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 So yeah, so Planet's public now. It went. We listed on the stock market in 2021. So the public numbers, I believe, are about 1,100 employees currently. And in my background, I'm a physicist, so I worked on space-based observational data. I covered this in the beginning, but science data in space from other NASA spacecraft, including Voyager, and then I designed satellites. I forgot that punchline of the joke, by the way. Having vowed never ever to work on optical design again after my PhD, I started a goddamn company doing optical satellites for space. So that was kind of how I accidentally walked into that. So, yep. Yeah, so that's a great question. Some of you know me as that guy as well, which is a nickname. My last name starts with a B, and if you if there were two Chris's, I'm Chris B, but if you mumble it, it becomes Crispy. And so that's my nickname for my NASA days. So when I was looking for a DJ name, they were like, use that. So I'm like, okay, you guys win. Yeah, so I've always loved music, but in a strange way, I liked computer game music. We didn't have a computer when I was growing up, but my neighbor did. And I just loved going over and playing computer games because the music was cool, like Commodore Amigas and Commodore 64s, like anyone who's old enough to remember that ancient material. And so I just was always sort of enraptured by the music on games. So I used to borrow computers from our high school in summer break. And I'd spend six weeks indoors writing music on a computer at home during summer instead of going out and doing all the normal summer stuff. So yeah, I wrote a lot of computer music. It never once occurred to me until I was like 18 that I could actually pick up a physical instrument and learn to play anything. But Mum got me a guitar when I was 18 and learned to play guitar as well. But yeah, I just always liked computer music, and that's how I ultimately became an electronic musician. And so I, even when I was working at NASA, actually I remember during my PhD getting frustrated and giving away all my guitars because I couldn't do my PhD and practice guitar 4 hours a day and be good at it. So I got really frustrated, vowed to give up music. And then my sneaky little brain kept writing computer music on my laptop. And so, yeah, all the way through university and my NASA career, I wrote songs on my laptop. And then in 2018, I put out an album of some of the, like a little travel diary of my travel music that I'd written. And that's sort of how I started this current phase of like, I should put out some of that stuff I wrote. So, any more? Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. And